Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Boyce, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And joining me from Maryland today is author Bela Gary. Bela, good day to you. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's a pleasure to have you on Inside Personal Growth. And we're going to be speaking about her book, The Misadventures of an Imperfect Woman. She had a prior book, The Midlife Crisis of a Perfect Woman. And I'm going to ask a question about the prior book. That was in 2020 that she wrote that book. And if you want to learn more about Bela, you can just go to Bela, B-E-L-A, Gary, Gary.com. There you'll find more about her. You'll find more about her intuitive writing program that she has. She's a very busy woman, and I think it would be awesome for all of my listeners to go up there and check it out. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bela formally. She's a writing coach, intuitive healer, and author. Her diverse background includes law, acting, and running a small press publishing company. Inspired by travel and human connection, her writings explores the human experience with a focus on spirituality and personal growth. Bela's journey has been marked by a quest for perfection, but she eventually realized that true happiness lies in embracing imperfection. She published, as I said earlier, The Midlife Crisis of a Perfect Woman in 2020, and The Misadventures of an Imperfect Woman is her second book. And for all of you, you can go to Amazon and pick up a copy of this book. So, Bela, what intrigued me was, you wrote this prior book with a completely flip-flopped title. um, you know, and that book was The Midlife Crisis of a Perfect Woman. I hope in 2020 you weren't trying to be perfect, and then in 2020 you figured out you were going to be imperfect. But the journey of a woman, as you say, was obsessed and in search for answers in her life, turned upside down by this intense romantic connection. Um, do these two books, and I know this might sound silly to some of my listeners, because usually when authors write books, there's a connection between them. But is there a connection in any way between where you were in 2020 and this in 2023?
Absolutely. It's a standalone book. The new book, The Misadventures, definitely stands on its own, but it is loosely connected because it's after this woman in the midlife crisis of a perfect woman realized she had been trying to live her life to, being perfect, and it didn't work. She met this man, he turned her life upside down, and then she became spiritually awakened and believed she was healed. She said, I'm healed, I'm letting him go, I'm empowered. And then however, it continues into the second book, The Misadventures, where she realizes she still has a lot of healing to do. She's still obsessed about the past. She's still obsessed about him. And it's all about her misadventures as she tries to forget him, which is, not the best way of healing, just burying everything. But so that's how they are connected, is really, and they could, they can stand on their own. I really believe that. But I kind of would like my readers to, make their own decision on whether that's, connected or not. I'm always open to the readers. This is for the reader's interpretation in many ways. So yes.
Well, you have a great quote right at the beginning of the book from Mia Baron. I think that's saying, in order to heal, we must first forgive. Sometimes that person we must forgive is ourselves. Speak with the listeners about this really important element of forgiving ourselves, because when you're imperfect, and we're talking about a spiritual message here as well as a personal journey, but the reality is it's so important when people are perfectionists to realize that self-love, you can't love anyone else unless you can let go and love yourself. Can you
Yeah,
comment
absolutely.
on that one? Because that was a
Sure.
great quote in the book that I just pulled. That was right there.
Yes. I think a huge part of healing is forgiving others, yes, which in many ways is much easier than forgiving yourself, because like you said, if you're trying to be perfect, you think, well, you're really hard on yourself, first of all. And forgiveness of yourself, people don't even think about that. I think a lot of the time they just go through and they say, okay, yes, I forgive someone. And in a way that's easier. And when you look at yourself, you say, oh my gosh, I did all these horrible things, or I made stupid decisions, or I took the wrong path. And you're just so hard on yourself. And really, it's all about looking and saying that it's normal. It's part of being human. It's part of being a spiritual soul to make mistakes, to not be perfect. And then you can begin to forgive yourself. But of course, you have to accept all of those things first. And it takes work sometimes for a lot of people, especially those that are seeking or trying to embody perfection.
But of all great spiritual philosophies, isn't that one of the biggest things that runs through most of them? I know it's at times people say, in Catholicism or Christianity, somebody might say, oh, well, unless you repent, you are forgiven. Um, and I think many people carry this story from childhood, whether they were brought up in Catholicism or they were Christian or they were Muslim or they were Jewish. It didn't matter, because the reality is all of those faiths and religions kind of have a similar story when it comes to this. So how would you address that for people? Because they think some of that stuff is very deep seated.
Yeah, no, it is. And even sometimes forgiving others, some people hold on to that for a very long time, no matter what, religion or their background. That's still hard, but we never think about ourselves. Which is, it's an important aspect. We only think about, because we are brought up, okay, you'll be forgiven if you repent, and redemption, and there's redemption involved in that. But we're just so hard on ourselves, we don't look at that. And I think it's a really important component, for people who maybe just recently became spiritually awakened, or finally recognized something in themselves that they wanted to develop. That's probably the hardest thing, is the self-forgiveness.
Yeah, it is. And I think your book does a really good job through the way you've weaved it in there. So at the heart of the book, what do you believe is the most potent message or lesson that you want to share with the readers? The really
Uh,
true, if I was to hit this hard, uh, what what would you tell the listeners out there today is really the true message here?
yes, it's hard because I have many in there, but I think it is authenticity. And you have to, to reach that point, of course, takes self-awareness and the desire to heal. And as you heal those things that you fear and the pain that you carry, and you accept your imperfections, then you can begin to live an authentic way. You live an authentic life. You don't care so much about making millions of dollars or having millions of followers on social media. It's all about just being the real person that you are, without the fear of making mistakes, and
I think
speaking.
true to yourself,
Yeah, being
right?
true to yourself and not being
You
afraid
know,
of judgment, really.
it's kind of like the Dharma, I mean, in Buddhism. So,
Mhm.
um, the reality is that that is a super potent message. It is. But what personal transformations did you undergo while you were kind of writing this book? And were there any moments of self-discovery that even surprised you? Because look, you're a writer, you teach intuitive writing at deep levels of intuition. Also comes a connection with the soul. Some people don't really get that. And I think this is a good, important discussion to have is what transformed while you were doing this? What deep connections did you make with your inner soul? And what was it speaking to you about?
Well, it was interesting because I wasn't expecting this. Like you said, for me, I was writing this and I began to embody my character. She embodied me. We became, we were healing together as I wrote. The more I wrote, the more realizations that I had about myself. And the big one was the fear of being alone. And
Mm,
I think that's a fear for many people, afraid of being alone, especially when you're older. And I mean alone, without a partner, not in a relationship. And although I love spending time by myself, it was a huge realization for me. I'm not afraid of dying. A lot of people are afraid of dying. Like, death doesn't scare me, but being alone scares me more. So that was one of
what
the
is
big.
it about being alone, Bella, that, I've addressed this in many shows. I go from Eastern philosophy to Western. And there's this concept. I had Thomas More on here speaking about the eloquence of silence not that long ago. And it was very poignant to me. One of the things we talked about was emptiness. And that obviously is a Buddhist philosophy. But when you really get deep into emptiness, what is it that we always have to fill something up when it's empty? So loneliness to me is something around, well, I'm gonna I'm gonna fill it up. You're not gonna just fill it up with anybody. You want a relationship with somebody who's significant and has like values. I get that. But can you address that for you? Because if that
Yes.
fear is truly still there and you don't fear dying, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
usually one of the biggest, they say public speaking and dying are the two biggest fears. So public speaking, I think you have down. Maybe you're not fearing that one, but dying, you're not fearing. And now you're saying you're fearing being alone.
Yes. Yes. I'm dealing with that, and I've dealt with that to an extent. But however, I think it's all about, when you talk about filling something up, I think it's filling, it's like I call it, you want to fill that hole in your soul. And that is filled with self-love. And it's not, you can get love from others, but once you have that self-love and you love yourself unconditionally, you're going to feel that something is missing. And I think that's really what it's about, is just loving yourself. That can fill the hole. And the more,
How did you open yourself up or prepare yourself for that?
I think I just had been preparing along the way, because I write other things. And for me, when I write, it's, like I say, it's intuitive. I write everything intuitively. My titles come to me intuitively. I meditate, deep meditations, dreams. I have very vivid dreams that I write down, and I journal. And I
Hmm.
think that's part of the process, is you start to unravel those things that you fear, and those things that cause you pain, and you begin to understand them.
Mm.
Not that you're immediately cured. It's going to take a while. And I don't think I don't think we're healed completely anyway. It's a lifelong process. But once you understand them, you can react differently in different situations. Your feelings shift when you understand why you're afraid of something. And, wanting love from others, because would help me feel not so lonely or alone and fill the hole in my heart. I realized I can fill all of that myself. I don't need somebody else to fill that hole. So that helps you become more, I guess, more independent, more of an independent soul. And I don't mean in the physical, I mean you need to be on your own as a soul before you can be combined with another soul, have a relationship. Like you said, you've got to love yourself unconditionally before you really can be, enmeshed with somebody else. And I mean enmeshed in a good way. Some people see enmeshed as all entangled, but I mean
Yeah,
like
no, I know
as
what
a
you mean.
wrapped around thing.
So what's that fear? Because normally the opposite of love and fear, and I just finished a book not that long ago. I was a co-author, The Precipice of Life, and I interviewed 23 people that climbed all the highest seven summits in the world.
Yeah.
And they said if you're not facing death, you're not living,
Hmm.
meaning the fear. So, you know, obviously every one of those mountain climber, both men and women who were willing to face those fears, feel like they're living life fully. And I think when you're in relationship with nature or you're in relationship with a person, you have to be willing to face that fear. Would you want to address that? Is there
Yeah.
a fear of being connected? Because it's this misadventures and this fear of being alone. I don't think you could be more alone than when you're on top of a mountain climbing. I'm looking at it
Yeah.
going,
Yeah, no, I know.
um,
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting actually. So do you have any insights there?
Well, I think that most of most of what most of what we do to make ourselves happy in the real world have nothing to do with making ourselves happy. And the people that we choose and the reasons that we choose them are sometimes for not for very positive reasons. We just do it,
Mm,
toxic energies, codependence, whatever it is. And we don't realize that. And I think that when the fears that we have about connection, whether I think partially we simultaneously fear love and want love. And the fear comes from another place, probably from fear of being vulnerable because of past hurt. So there's these intermeshed things that always play. And that, in my character in the book, this was the same thing. She simultaneously feared and wanted things at the same time. So there was this disconnect. Facing your fears, and you're talking about nature. When I did a cross-country trip by myself in the car, just like my character did. My first night in this remote cabin, I chose it on purpose. My character, this was a very similar story. She chose the same thing. It was terrifying. I could not sleep. I had every single light on, outdoors and indoors. But you know what? As the days passed, and I kept doing this, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to stay on my own. And I think as I went through those things, that's where my not having fear of death, because I started to face the things, I was afraid of being killed. So I'm no longer afraid of that. Traveling to countries and doing things, adventurous things like climbing a mountain, like you said, you don't fear death. You may fear other things, but I think doing those challenging, adventurous things that some people would be afraid to do because they're afraid to die, it takes away that fear. So I think
well, you faced your fears,
face
you
the
know.
fear. You have
Yeah,
to face the
and
fears.
I
Yeah.
think that the only way through it is to do it.
Yes.
Um, you
Yeah.
know, and I had a question for you because, you know, how do you feel that societal expectations that are all around us? Look, you were in law at one point, and I'm sure gave it up because you had this desire to do this. Contribute to the misadventures of a woman today, and can you share any anecdotes from the book that particularly address this? Because we see the women's right movement. I was watching a story the other day, Glorious Dynam. It's like, well, has anything really changed since 1970? Or are we still in the same position, kind of fighting for our rights? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think things have changed personally. I mean, I personally think that, but I think the internet, social media has in some ways made things worse because, you see these celebrities and influencers and all these personas, and they meet, if they're women, they meet men, and they make it look so easy, as if you can just, it's so easy. You meet this great man, you have a great life, and it's all a persona, it's all fake. So I think those societal pressures are still there. Especially, I mean, I'm speaking for older women in general, because it's very, you look at ads, movies, books, everywhere you look, it's people looking for a happy ending and meeting and finding true love. And it doesn't work like that. It's not like in the books or in the movies where it's a happily ever after. There's a lot more work involved. So I think
not that Cinderella fairy tale.
not that Cinderella fairy tale that we all want when we're young, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that that's part of it. And it's just aging also. As an older woman, you begin to see you worry about, oh my gosh, I'm going to be gray one day, I'm going to have wrinkles, no man's going to want me. So there's pressures. I mean, you see the ads and you see these beautiful women, and even in movies I was reading something yesterday, and I think it was Harrison Ford, and I don't remember what movie it was, but he is, I don't know how old he is. He's pretty old, but
Yeah.
his female co-star is like half his age. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense to me. It's not reality. And they make it seem like reality. I mean, even in dating, came across men who would say, I was a lot older than the women they usually date, and they're my age or older. So maybe it's a post-divorce thing. I don't know, but I think
Well,
that,
I think it's not to interrupt, but it's more prevalent today because of the Aquarian age. I think that we're in that um, these long-term marriages, like Hugh Jackman, 27 years, decides that he's getting a divorce the other day. Another friend of mine, after 25 years, decided the other day, and I hear more and more of this,
yeah,
25 years in a marriage, 30 years in a marriage, they're leaving or separating. And the question is, have they shared it all? And is it done? And is it this kind of incarnation? Am I really supposed to start that all over again?
yes.
We see more and more of that. Do you have any comments about that? And what do you hope the readers will gain from embracing that? That would be maybe considered an imperfection. Okay.
Yeah,
Because in our society today, there still is, even though people maybe don't want to admit it, there's a stigma attached to that because we have these old values about kind of staying married,
right.
right?
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, speaking from my experience, I reached a point in my marriage when I was taking care of everybody, and I was trying to be perfect and create perfect lives for my family and my kids. And I just couldn't take it anymore. My father died, and it was an awakening for me. It was, okay, I need to do something more. I need to find, not necessarily find somebody else, but just live a life for myself. And I think, yet when you talk about the, the Aquarian age, it's all about, evolving, spiritual evolution.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can't do that if you're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel stuck. Not that you're stuck. Some people just feel stuck and they're not. But so if you're stuck, you need to get out of your stuckness and find growth. And I think that's what people are doing. And I don't,
Well, and I think that's partially why people are separating.
yeah, no,
Is
I
one
definitely think,
person is moving forward spiritually, and another person may or may not be, may be caught in their own ways. But that seems to be some of what I see when I ask my friends who go through it, what's going on. Um, you talk about these misadventures. Are there any moments of adversity, whimsicalness, mistakes, or a mix at all, mix up? Can you could share a favorite misadventure from the book? What would be one of your favorite ones?
um, I think that, well, I don't want to give a lot away because there are a lot of little like details here and there.
Hmm.
But I was going to talk about the cabin one because that one, staying in the cabin and the whole misadventure of the foxes in the night and all the noise, and she comes out with a flashlight and her cell phone, and she doesn't know what to do, and she turns on every light, locks herself in her room. I mean, to me, that was me, because I did the same thing, but it was also a it was just one of those things that she did that eventually she got over. But it was a small one. I mean, I can probably think of a better one than that.
Well, it's
Uh,
not small actually because it's a big fear.
it
Um,
is it is it is a big fear. I'm trying
yeah,
to find a
I
related to
mean, look,
men, but
I've even as a male, I've been there before.
yeah.
It, I don't think there's any guy out there that can't say, "Oh, I went camping and I felt fully, uh, you know, fully safe." Um, because you are connected to wilderness. Are there going to be snakes? Are there going to be bears? Are there going to be this? Are there going to be that? And your mind keeps racing and building up a story, and then
Yeah.
the story becomes kind of reality for you, and then you act it out. And that kind of brings me to this question. There's people listening to this now are that are constantly in pursuit of perfection, often to their own detriment. What advice or insights uh, does your book offer them, and what would you tell them?
Okay. Some of the things are easy to say, but hard to do. But I really believe that they're true. So I'm going to first tell you, because I've got several, and it's really not being afraid to make mistakes. That is hard, but you you need to learn and grow. And it's important to make mistakes. That's how you learn and grow. And sometimes those mistakes end up bringing beautiful things into your life. So I think it's important, and I don't even like to call them mistakes. I just call them choices, because one choice leads to another. Surrender. You can't control everything or anyone, only yourself. So you just have to let that go and surrender. Love yourself unconditionally. Let go of the past and write it all down and journal. That is the key, I think. I think journaling and writing are the most important thing to healing. And I know people struggle with that, but you don't have to write, 10 paragraphs. You can write just a few sentences. So I think that's important. And some of this sounds easy, let it go. I can't stand that when people say, oh, just let it go. You can't. You have got to figure out what happened. You've got to heal, and then it becomes easier to let go.
Yeah, I had Bruce Lipton on here the other day, the biology belief. And I think what happens is, when we're kids up to the age of 7, and I think this is important for our listeners as well, there's been programs that have been put into us. We weren't really born with a bunch of programs, but we have these programs. And in the subconscious, they continue to play. And what Bella is really saying is she's kind of asking you to look at the program and see if you can rewrite it.
Yep.
And you can rewrite the program. And you mentioned authenticity 5 minutes ago or so in our
Yes.
conversation. And I think celebrating authenticity over perfection is a good one. How does the book add to this narrative, and what's your personal position or stance on this? I mean, because authenticity, look, Brene Brown talks about it at length. Many of my listeners who subscribe to one of many books talk about authenticity, and it's easier said than done. It's a word I think that is overused, but
Yes.
not over applied.
Yes. I agree. I agree. People use like you said, people use a lot of things over
Yeah,
and over. They don't really tell you what to do.
yeah,
I mean, in my book, my character goes through many transformations. But in parts of the book, as she's dating and meeting men, she's a chameleon. She can be anything that the men want her to be. She knows how to read them. And she does that for a long time until, she finally realizes that it's not a really good way to go about living.
right.
But she's not being authentic. She wants to be authentic and be herself, but at the same time, she wants to be what they want to be because she wants a man. She's very, it's very complicated. So I think part of it does have to do with accepting your imperfections, and accepting those imperfections really is, like I said, it's a deep dive into your fears, and you have to accept them. You can't just say, I fear this and I have this pain. You have to say, I accept this part of myself. I understand why it's there. And that, then once you accept those imperfections, then you can live a more authentic life. So yes, authenticity comes from accepting your imperfections. So I think that that's how they're connected. And once you start to live more authentically with practice, eventually you can really embody that. And it doesn't stay with you all the time. You have to understand you'll have moments where you're not going to feel like you're, operating in an authentic way. But as long as you see it, I think if you see it, you're like, oh, okay, I see what I did there. I think what's important is just recognizing when you're not being authentic, recognizing when you're fearing judgment from others, because I think that's one of the biggest things also preventing people from being authentic is fearing judgment.
And I think that whole concept of trying to read a man and then get him as a result of you being able to change your color, the chameleon
Yes.
concept. I think as long as I think if you're doing that intentionally to attract somebody, and then you go back to being whoever you are as a result, there's going to be challenges in that relationship, because I think the person needs to see you for who you are right up front. And then if they don't like it or you don't like them, you say, okay, great, this isn't working out. And that brings me to this navigating through your own misadventures and how it shaped your resilience. Are there tools or practices you'd recommend to others from the book around resilience? Again, that's another word. And
Mhm.
again, this comes down to, I know in the end, our ego is here to protect us in many ways. And in other ways, it's very tough to you're always going to have it.
Yeah.
You're not always going to control it. Okay.
Yes.
So the question would be, in shaping your resilience, are there practices you'd recommend for people to become more resilient?
I th- well, practice makes perfect, as they say.
Hmm.
Practice makes imperfect. I'm going to say that's really because you're trying to accept your imperfections. I think some of the things I already mentioned, just facing, looking at your fears and facing them, and which is a process. Looking inward, not comparing yourself to others because you're a different person and people have their own issues, their own imperfections, and you just deal with yourself. Trying to follow your own true path, which a lot of people don't even know what their true path is. And I think everybody has a true path, and that's very personal. And you will know it when you see it as you work through a lot of these things. If healing, always thinking that you need healing and not going around saying, oh, I'm healed, I'm fine, I'm moving on, because everyone always needs healing. Writing, meditating, and you don't have to just sit down and deep meditation and think about nothing. I think meditation, obviously, to me, involves, there's thoughts in there, there's visions, there are things that you feel, and you can just go for a walk and you're meditating, you can go for a swim and you're
Hmm.
meditating. You don't have to
Hmm.
follow all the rules that of meditation. um and having empathy for others, I think that's the key. If we just start having more compassion and empathy for other people, that also helps us as a tool to understand ourselves.
Yeah, and Bella, I would say that you know, you say misadventures. I think people frequently look for the destination, but they forget the journey.
Yeah.
Um, and what this misadventures is about the journey. And I think it's important that people embrace the journey no matter what it is, because the destination, we don't always know what it's going to be. That sometimes is a surprise. And
Yes.
I think you address this fear of being alone is a projection of the destination, um, not the journey. And what you're learning how to do is live the journey and embrace it, regardless of whether or not there is a love at the end or the perfect man or whatever it might be. So while writing the stories or the misadventures, were there any that were especially difficult for you to put down on paper? And if so, how did you overcome that? Because there's lots of stories in here.
Yes, yes. I would say my first book was more difficult because that
Okay.
I was not used to sharing my vulnerabilities and my fears, my thoughts, my feelings. And that one I did promote as being a fictionalized memoir. So it was about me. But once I got past that, this one that it wasn't so difficult. I feel really comfortable writing about these things now. So I would say it was more about the realization, you know, it was more about sharing it that made me a little bit worried. Writing it, I had no fear. But when it came to the point that I was going to publish it, I thought, well, there are a lot of things in here these people don't know. They're going to think it's me, which of course it partially is. I think all authors end up writing about themselves, whether they
Yeah.
know it or not. Um,
Especially in
but
books like this.
yeah,
Yep.
I just said, okay, that's fine. I'm not afraid anymore. So there wasn't anything really difficult, mostly writing about the big realizations about my fears and how I was a cause of my own suffering in many ways and made more mistakes and judged others. And my intuition was so messed up for a long time because of my fear. And I always went around saying, I'm very intuitive. I can tell things, I can read things. So that kind of bothered me. It made me feel like a hypocrite. But it was true because it happened to my character. It happened to me. When you're fearful and in pain, you can't always use your intuition effectively.
So how does somebody like you, this you teach intuitive writing workshops, how does someone like you help another person who's been through both the dark side of this and the bright side of it, help someone find that state of intuition to connect with a higher source and then trust? Because there's one thing, intuition, to hear. Some people feel, some people see. There's all kinds of
Mhm.
different sorts of intuition that we get. Um, but when it comes to writing, what are you guiding your students in doing to actually center themselves to be able to make this connection and then trust in it, right? I think that's the biggest thing. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, I get an intuitive hit, but do I really, really move with it? Do I make any decisions based on it? Or do
Yeah.
I just hear it or feel it and not do anything with it? And there's also the discernment side.
Yes.
Where is this coming from? As somebody who was a lawyer, I'm sure the discernment side at times was more than, or I said you were in law, you said, but um, you know, that's got to be a big deal. And how
It
do
is.
you set people up for success with this intuitive writing?
Well, in my writing, in the writing workshop, I have several guided meditations. I start with that. Actually, I open with, with a guided meditation that's about 20 minutes long, and we go through this beautiful landscape, and there are all sorts of other, other things that happen. And I think that people learn to relax, they open themselves up, they begin to sense, feel, maybe see things, and just to write them down. I just tell people, write it down. And I think the more you practice that, the writing, the meditation, the more you begin to trust. I mean, you may get intuitive pings that you don't know are intuition, but if you have it written down and you can look back and say, oh, wow, that's what my intuition was trying to tell me, then you grow and begin to trust. It's a process. It doesn't happen right away. I believe. I mean, even people who suddenly become spiritually awakened, they're not really sure what to trust. I know now what to trust. For me, intuition, it's not heightened emotion and it's not logic. It's in a balance of those two things. When I feel an intuitive ping, I'm like, okay, yes. And there it is. It's just there. It's not emotional. Yes, sometimes I think the big pings that can bring the fear out. And you have to discern, like you said, is it really my fear or is it my intuition? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what messes people up is the fear. We don't know
Mm-hmm.
which is which until we start to experience it. So it's experience, really. It's experience and understanding yourself. And like I said, journaling and going back and reading what you've written. Sometimes I go back and I read what I wrote a year ago. And I have things I wrote down that were intuitive pings. I have no idea what they mean still. And that's okay. I may not ever know, but occasionally I'll go back and I'll say, oh my gosh, this is referring to what's happening right now. Had I paid attention, would it have changed things? Maybe not, because I think we're meant to follow a path and I wasn't meant to know it then. So you also have to trust that if you don't know something, it's because you're not meant to know it in that moment. Maybe you're meant to know it later, and maybe you need to learn something. So that's how I look at life. It's just a life, it's learning. If I missed something, it's because I needed to learn something. Does that
Well,
make
and
sense?
intuition is heightened as well. I'm not going to just say through your meditation, your contemplation, your journaling, but
Yeah,
it is inter-reflection, whatever that is for you.
right.
It also changes the vibratory level at which you operate and can receive messages. So messages are received as a result of a higher level of consciousness. There's another word that's used quite a bit, but
Yes,
the reality is as you upscale that, you have an opportunity to get in touch with more of it and know from a place of, is it true that it is true,
right.
versus you having this discerning, well, do I have to question it? Is it coming from fear or wherever it's coming from? So
Yes,
are there
yes.
any takeaways you'd want to leave the listeners with from the misadventures of an imperfect woman? Because you've got these intuitive writing workshops, and for my listeners, just go to Bela Gary, BELAGARY.com. There you're going to find out about Bella, her writing workshops, her intuitive writing workshops, and you can connect with her there. What would you say? And I'm going to hold the book up for the listeners. You can go out to Amazon, get a copy of this, and we'll put a link to Amazon to that. We'll also put a link to her website so that you can do that. Any takeaways, Bella?
I think read the book as actually, I'm going to add, my characters don't have names, my main characters. I don't name them on purpose because I want people to be able to embody them. And I think read it as an experience that you are going through, perhaps yourself, and understand the character so that parts of her become you, and it leads to a better understanding of yourself. I think that's a good way to read it. I think it's also fun and funny, although it's dark humor. Some people said it was dark humor, but it's misadventures are in their own way satirical, ironic, and I think that's how the book is. And just be open to it, and listen to not only what the character said, but the other characters. There's some little characters in there that give her advice, and she's completely surprised because she's always the one that wants to give people advice. So I think it's just enjoying the journey, like you said, enjoying the journey of the book.
Well, and I think adventure, period, not misadventure.
Yeah.
For my listeners, okay, some of the adventures may be misadventures.
Mhm.
Some of them just might be surprising adventures,
Exactly.
where you're going to find something. And the fact is that you're moving in harmony with a spirit and you're trusting it.
Exactly.
And I think that's the biggest part, is that, you know, whether you do a podcast show or you work for a charity or you're a lawyer, or what, doesn't matter what your vocation is. What are the adventures that you're taking in life? And if they turn out to be some misadventures, what are you learning from them?
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, is the learning lessons from the misadventures that occur along the way.
Yes.
Like your cabin example of the fear associated with the sounds and the foxes and the flashlight and coming out and so on. I think that's a really good example, actually, to be honest with you. So what are those fears that are holding you back from first taking the adventure? And then, are you afraid of possibly a misadventure? So I think just get out there and go for it. Go get a copy of this book. Bella, it's been a pleasure having you on Inside Personal Growth. Namaste to you. Thank you for the time and all the good work you've done, and actually putting it in a way that if somebody wants to read a really cool story, most of these personal growth books are written, as nonfiction. This one is fiction, and you can get your teeth into it and enjoy it. So thanks so much for being on Inside Personal Growth.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It's been fun. Great. Really great. Thank you.
Thank you.